Welcome to another episode of Mastery Talks. We're your hosts, Yana
and Juliana. And today we have an incredible guest, Huggy Rao, professor of organizational behavior and human resources at Stanford GSB.
Huggy is the co-author of two groundbreaking books, The Friction Project and Scaling Up Excellence, both written with his colleague Bob Sutton. In this episode, we explore how the friction in organizations can be both good and bad.
Huggy shares fascinating insights on how leaders can often unintentionally create friction, and also how leaders can become friction fixers. We also discussed the problems of time poverty and edition bias, and the importance of introducing good friction to slow down decision making.
Whether you're an entrepreneur, scaling a startup, or a leader in large organization, Huggy's wisdom is sure to challenge your assumptions and provide actionable strategies for managing friction. So let's jump right in. Huggy, welcome. The Friction Project seems like a natural continuation of your book with Bob Sutton, Scaling Up Excellence, which focuses on spreading constructive beliefs and behaviors as organizations grow. Could you share the story for how you wrote the first book and what feedback led you to realize that there was a need for another one?
Thank you. That's a great question, Yana, and I'm so glad you see the connection between both books. So, the first book was we wanted to understand how do companies become bigger and better. And one aspect of that is, of course, spreading excellence within the organization. And the book did well, I don't know, it was a Wall Street Journal bestseller and all of that. So we were very thankful. But when we went and spoke to people in organizations and taught the material at various levels in the organization, particularly at Stanford, executive education programs, what we realized is, the closer you were to the C suite, you were the head of a business unit, you were in the C suite, you loved the message. They loved the message of scaling up excellence. But when we went down to middle and junior management, it became very clear while they liked the message, their big complaint was it's very hard to get anything done. And so people often think you write books because you research and you teach, and there's some of that. But a lot of times people say things to you that are like, that jolt you, that shock you. So I was once teaching in a Stanford executive education classroom, and there was a participant who didn't have a name card. So I went to him and I said, "Hey, where do you work?" So he smiles very mischievously and he says, "Professor, I work in a frustration factory." I mean, can you just imagine somebody going to work? A company which doesn't produce frustrations, but is a factory. Like every day you're going to get frustrated. And then there's another young woman who I'll never forget. She said this with a quiver in her voice and a tear in her eye. And she said, I do a lot of mindless coordination work and I go home, I'm exhausted, and all I've got left are scraps of myself for my family. I had tears in my eyes and I felt that is wrong. We should not design work and design organizations so that people go home with scraps of themselves. What kind of world are we creating? So that's how we got into this 7 years ago. And we researched, we conducted experiments, we spoke to people, all of these things. But, it was, I think, when was it? Last year, our book came out in 2024 January, but it was last year that finally everything gelled together for us in the form of a book. Because when you write a book like this, it's not just writing a book. The thing that made me feel very happy, Yana and Juliana, was a couple of people who read the book. They said they really liked the book. And I said, what is it about it that you like? And they told me something that really warmed my heart. And they were middle and junior people in a company. And they said, we felt heard. And that's kind of important. And so that's why we wrote this book. And this book is we've it's been received very, very well. In fact, last Monday, there's this thing called the Next Big Idea Club. And this is a panel consisting of Malcolm Gladwell, Adam Grant, Daniel Pink, and Susan Cain. Every year they review a lot of books every month, and each season they pick two books as the best books. And our book, The Friction Project, was chosen as one of the best books for the season. Yeah, and so you feel very it's a little bit of a fluke, as these kinds of like recognitions, but you feel gratified that hey, people are reading it, people are finding it useful. And most of all, what we're doing is, I think we're kind of giving people not only tools, but we're also giving them a vocabulary to talk about what's wrong with work and how to fix it. I mean, that's the way I would describe it. So it's been very gratifying. And of course, as you know, we dedicate the book to people who are wiser than us, which namely our wives, because they deal with friction from us all the time and they understand things. So it's been kind of like a great adventure to write the book.
Wow, that's a powerful story. As you say, friction in organizations often starts at the top, but your book resonates with the middle and junior level employees who feel unheard. Correct me if I'm wrong. When scaling excellence, you end up scaling both excellence and friction, right?
It's not only the friction, Yana. So the way we sort of think about it is, if you really want to scale excellence, what's the most important thing? We really have to get people in organizations, employees. We need to get them as a leader. That's really your responsibility. Your responsibility is to ask yourself, what are the conditions I can create so that my employees can choose a more curious and generous version of themselves? See, we all don't have one personality. Freud thought we did, but I don't think he kind of understands how many person we have. We have many versions of ourselves, and I think the person who understood it really was the Buddha, because in 329 BC he just told everybody there is no big man upstairs. You are the lamp. And you know what? There are many versions of yourself you can choose from. Choose one that can be a lamp. In a small way, that's the challenge in a company too. And in order to get people to choose a curious and generous version of themselves, we've got to take out obstacles that overwhelm and infuriate and anger people. But at the same time, what we discovered was we went in with this orientation, but we also discovered that leaders need to put in friction too. You need to put in obstacles that slow down and educate people, because otherwise, all of us can choose an overconfident and myopic version of ourselves. We can do that very easily. So, how do you kind of slow people down so that they don't choose an overconfident version? So, you need friction there. And at the same time, you got to take friction out to make it easy for people to be more curious and generous. And that's like really the big challenge. So, a leader always has to ask himself or herself, what is it, what what do I make easy for my people to do by taking out bad friction, obstacles that infuriate and overwhelm people? And what is it I need to make harder for my people to do? And so you can't make everything easy, you can't make everything hard, and that's the balance, and it's endless. You don't solve the problem in one day, 1 month, 1 year. This is a continuing thing, and that's why we call it the friction project.
So, Hagi, you've mentioned that friction often starts from the top and it's up to leaders to manage it. Could you give an example from your work when you observed these dynamics clearly?
So let me give you a great question, Juliana. So in one company that we were working with, the executive team, the executive committee, the C suite, they met once a week for 1 hour. So I asked them, I said, hey, how long do you guys spend on this meeting? And the guy looks at me and he says, well, there are five of us. We spend 1 hour a week. So 52 times uh, five. So I said, but that's the amount of time you spend in a meeting. What about the rest of the company? How much time do they have to spend on helping you have this meeting? And what was found later was, in order to support a 1 hour meeting every week for the executive team, the rest of the company was spending 300,000 hours. Now the question is, what is the ROI on 300,000 hours? Are you getting anything out of it, or is it a complete waste of time? So you see the problem. So that's a simple way in which people at the top actually create a lot of friction. There's also another reason why people create friction at the top. There is like 30 years of research done by, Deb Grunfeld from Stanford GSB and Dr. Keltner. And what they show is, the more powerful you are or the more powerful you feel, the less you search and the more tunnel vision you have. So you're kind of blind. So that's one problem. And the other problem is, the higher up you are, the more likely it is you don't know how work gets done two, three levels beneath you. And one study shows that people in the C suite underestimate coordination difficulty by 50%. They think everything is easy to do. So when you think everything is easy to do, what do? You ask people to do more. And that's kind of where there's a problem, which I'm happy to discuss with, because the problem is, in companies, people are time poor. There's enormous time poverty. All of us do so many things. It's okay if we were time poor. But what we talk about in our book is the relentless bias that people have in organizations to add things rather than to subtract things. So we call it the addition bias. We have an entire chapter where we talk about a number of studies that demonstrate it. One study shows, for example, that it doesn't matter what the experimental task is, whether it's to build a Lego model or plan a vacation or reform a university, people give suggestions to add things than to subtract. For example, in reforming a university, 89% of the suggestions had to do with addition, 11 had to do with subtraction. So you don't have time, you have addition. What does that do? It creates a perfect storm. And what's the perfect storm about? The first thing is, if you add, what you do is you create so much mental load that people lose willpower. So you need willpower to choose a curious and generous version of yourself. So in this experiment, it's a very simple experiment. They took a couple of hundred people, they randomly put them into two groups. One group was given two digits to remember. So if Yana and I were in that group, Yana got one two-digit number, I got another two-digit number. The other group was given seven digits. So Juliana got a seven-digit number for herself. And if I were in the seven-digit group, I'd be given a seven-digit number. That's it. The sevens are in one building. They don't even know the twos exist. The twos are in a different building. They don't know the sevens exist. So if everybody is given two digits, everybody is given seven digits, the door is opened, and then they go into a lobby, and there is a table. At one end of the table, you have fruit, and at the other end, you have chocolate cake. And the purpose of the experiment is to find out who's going to eat most of the chocolate cake. Who do you think is going to eat most of the chocolate cake? People asked to remember seven things or two. What do you think?
Seven, obviously. I would be so stressed.
Well, yeah, so it turns out that what happens is, the people who are asked to remember two things, they look at the chocolate cake and say, oh my God, I want to eat that chocolate cake. For most of us, unless you have an allergy, chocolate cake is a temptation. What is it we need inside of ourselves to say no to temptation? Willpower. The two-digit people, plenty of willpower in the gas tank. They say, I shouldn't eat the chocolate cake, I'll eat the fruit, I should go work out and all that. What about people with 7 digits? They're saying, what's the number? 938. By then, you finished off two slices.
I would eat the whole thing.
Yeah, you would eat the whole thing. That's right, Julian. And you see the problem? What we do is, do we ask people to remember seven things in a company? No, 14, 21. So everybody keeps on adding. And the problem is, when these things, when you keep on adding, it's hard to become curious. You just get so overwhelmed. You just say, I don't have the bandwidth to find out more and ask questions. You kind of say, forget it. Helping other people, not a chance. Now, on top of that, if you add time poverty and you give people very little time, the big problem we talk about in the book is good people can easily do bad things. See, it's not bad people doing bad things that's the problem. The problem in companies is good people doing bad things. So, what happens when you add time poverty and the addition bias to people? One study done at the Yale Divinity School is kind of very interesting. They taught people the parable of the Good Samaritan. But then they told people, you're going to have very little time. You need to think of a speech about the parable of the Good Samaritan, helping people who know, who need your help, but you have to go to a building 200 yards away. So they were given very little time, maybe 5 minutes or so, to think, rehearse the speech, walk over. But unbeknownst to them, the experimenters hired other students to lie on the path with paint coming out, red paint coming out, and the students were saying, I'm dying, I'm losing blood, I need to go to the hospital. Another guy saying, I'm dying of thirst, this, that, and the other. And they wanted to find out how many people would actually stop by and help these people. What do you think? Hardly 10% of the people stopped by to help people who needed them. The other 90, they said, I'm too busy rehearsing my speech on helping other people. I got to go give it there. And they forgot the whole point of the speech. So that's the problem. Time poverty and addition bias. That is why we need to subtract.
Time poverty and addition bias. Wow, what a terrible mix. Our natural tendency to keep adding more tasks and responsibilities is so counterproductive. I love Lego case you mentioned in your book, where people continued adding pieces even after being asked $10 for each new Lego piece they add, despite the cost. It's so telling of our mindset.
Yeah, all the time. But that is the whole problem, see, that you've read in the book. That is exactly right. People constantly want to add. And the big problem is in companies, when you ask people to subtract Yana and Juliana, they actually think it's one and done. Oh, we took this away and that's over. But instead, real subtraction in a company is like mowing the lawn. How regularly do we have to mow the lawn? What do you think? You got to do it once a week at least. If you don't mow the lawn, what's going to happen? A lot of weeds are going to be there. Then the flowers are going to die, the fruits are going to die, and all that. And you can't put anything new in there. The big difficulty in companies is subtraction is an orphan problem. And real leaders to me are people who solve orphan problems. If somebody gives you a problem and say, go solve the problem, yeah, you did a good job, but that doesn't make you a leader. Leader means nobody cares about this problem, but yet it's a big problem for us. I'm going to do something to kind of fix it. So
Even
you
if you are
really,
not being rewarded for that
that's
action.
right. And so you really have to. So in the book, we talk about lots of things. I don't want to repeat all of that. I want to give you a simple example of mowing the lawn. I was teaching 60 chief operations officers, and I asked them, is there anybody mowing the lawn in your company? They all looked at me and said, except one woman. And I said, how do you do that? She said, we're trying to do it. And I said, what do you do? And she said, well, I'm a chief operations officer. I'm on the executive committee. We meet once a week on Friday. But she said, when we meet once a week for an hour on Friday, we give about 15 minutes to discuss something called the Ridiculist. Ridiculist. And what's on the Ridiculist? crazy, stupid things that a company does. Now, in how many companies do people actually spend time looking at the ridiculous? That's kind of what we think people should do. In one on one meetings, if I have a one on one meeting with you, I can ask you, hey, what's on your ridiculous? Are you taking things out? How can I help you? And you can do the same thing with me. Let me give you an example of a wonderful item on the ridiculous somebody came up with when I did the exercise in class. Number one issue in this company, ridiculous. We have many meetings about customers, but we never have a customer present in any of these meetings. Now, don't you think that's ridiculous? In another multinational company, I asked them, what's the most ridiculous thing at work? People wrote back and said, our life is every day. These are senior vice presidents in a big multinational company. They said, we spend 6 hours every day in meetings. Can you imagine what happens to somebody who spends 6 hours in meeting? You'd be dead.
Out of 8-hour workday? Yeah.
So I asked them, do you have a meeting free day? They all laughed and said, yes, Professor, Sunday. So you see the problem? I mean, it's crazy. So we need to subtract and we need to get rid of stupid stuff. And the sort of things you have to do are start with the ridiculous. But what we tell people is when you want to subtract things that have big psychological magnitude. For example, in one company, very big company, this person is like a vice president. I asked this person, hey, you took a taxi to the airport, how many approvals did you need to get? And she said 3 approvals to use a taxi. So you have to start taking those kinds of things, and then you have to go to the economically, take out things that have big economic magnitude. And often the things you need to subtract there, and I'll close very quickly, is so in we wrote a case study about one company, AstraZeneca, they saved 2 million hours to give it as a gift back to people. But what do most companies do? So when I do this exercise in class, the first 5 minutes, everybody says, my company has 30,000 employees. I think I will divide 2 million hours by 30,000. So per employee, this is so many hours. So we'll reduce this meeting, we'll reduce that meeting. I'm like, man, that's accounting. The way they reduce 2 million hours is not doing this kind of bullshit. They said, what are the mistakes we keep repeating and wasting everybody's time? So in India, they found that medical representatives were knocking on the doors of every doctor and wasting time. They didn't have a targeted list. Providing them a targeted list saved them a bunch of time.
So, everything we've discussed and the knowledge from your book seems especially relevant for larger corps. But what about startups? Is it relevant for startups too?
Yes, the biggest problem startups have is, first of all, they add too many people too quickly. See, good startups are the one where it's very hard to hire people. If you've added 20 people very quickly, they're not going to be good people usually. And then you're going to create a bunch of attendant problems with that. So making hiring very hard is super important in startups. The second thing is, what startups kind of also do is you have to be careful about how and when you add like a lot of procedure and structure. Uh, they don't think very carefully about it. So let me give you an example. So in fact, I should tell you, Juliana, about a study that I asked my PhD student to do. I told her, go to all the Bay Area startups, look at everything they've published, and mission, vision, you name it. She looked at it, and I said, come back with using large language models, come back with a number that tells me how much do they emphasize speed? So she came and said, I can give you a number to tell you linguistically how much do they emphasize speed. What do I do with this? She asked me. I said, now that you have this number, you take a look at all these Bay Area startups again and find out how quickly did they receive a $1 billion valuation, or how quickly they became a unicorn. And what did she find? The more you emphasize speed, the quicker you got a $1 billion valuation. She said, this is fantastic. I said, wait a minute, do another analysis. And she said, what is that analysis? I said, show me the relationship between the time taken to become a unicorn and the probability of lawsuits 2 years down the line. And what did she find? The quicker you receive the $1 billion valuation, the more likely it is in 2 years down, you will find lawsuits from customers and the others saying you messed up things. Because what people don't realize is one side is speed, but the other side is time poverty. So, very relevant for startups too.
It's fascinating how startups often emphasize speed. And as an entrepreneur, I used to think the key to startup success was all about moving fast and breaking things. But then with just one good question, and suddenly I'm thinking maybe it's time we focus on speed limits instead of speed records. Thank you, Hage.
Well, good, I think if you don't sort of slow down, we make bad decisions too. So you look at me, Yana, and Juliana. I'm a morning person. I get up at 4:30 every day. I've been doing it since the time I was 13
And you
years.
meditate as a part of your morning routine,
I
right?
do meditate. My mother was a high school math teacher, so which meant I had to wake up at like 4:30 and do a lot of calculus and all that. I don't know whether your parents made you do that in Ukraine. I imagine maybe they were tough.
My parents made me do math.
They say, you know what I mean, Julia. But I know for myself, if you ask me anything between 4:30 and 2 p.m., I'm extremely data driven. I look at a lot of things, I make careful decisions. But if you ask me anything after 2, I'm tired, and usually I make very quick decisions, and usually I regret them because I'm wrong most of the time because they're very quick decisions. So, what do I tell myself? Anything important, I never make a decision after 12 o'clock in the afternoon because I know the probability it's wrong is going to increase. So, you need to kind of slow down. And most entrepreneurs, they don't understand. So that's why you need to create friction. Maybe your viewers might be interested in the story of a great Greek hero, Ulysses. You both of you obviously know Ulysses, right? Do you know the story of Ulysses and the island of the Sirens? So you know Ulysses, right? He fought in all the wars, Trojan War and all. So he's got a boat and he wants to go back and meet his wife Penelope after God knows how many years. But there is an island called the Island of the Sirens. They're half women, half birds, and they sing beautifully. There's a small problem. You can actually get completely hypnotized by them and you can get trapped and then dash against the rocks and you can never escape. So Ulysses's problem is he wants to listen to the music, but he knows the danger of getting trapped. So he goes and consults another Greek god and says, what do I do? And this Greek goddess says, well, maybe there's one way out for you. And he says, what is it? And she says, if you really want to listen to the music, the most important thing is you have to put wax in the ears of your sailors so they can't hear the music. Not only can they not hear the music, they cannot also not hear an instruction from you. So they will be managing the boat, your boat, but they can't hear the music. You can hear the music, but we will tie you to the mast. And we will actually, put cloth in your mouth and tie that up because you can't even ask your sailors anything. The only thing that will be open is your ears. So the boat goes by. Ulysses is the only one who listens to the music, and then they go on to meet Penelope later. So when you look at that story, what did Ulysses do? He put a constraint, he created friction for himself, good friction. He slowed himself down. And it's the same thing with entrepreneurs. When I meet entrepreneurs, I ask them, I tell them the story of Ulysses and I say, hey, where's your mast?
This is the first time ever I've heard someone using the analogy of Ulysses to talk about startups.
Yeah, that's a very illustrative example. It really makes me think about why it's so counterintuitive for startups to slow down. I think the venture world is always pushing us to speed up, and there is this idea that startups are numbers game. The more tests you run, the higher the probability of finding product market fit. So, how do you reconcile this counterintuitive idea of slowing down with the need for rapid iteration?
So the thing is, getting product market fit, Yana, is a complex task. So they looked at people who did very well in complex tasks and they said, let's find out what they do with simple tasks and complex tasks. And what did they find out about the best performers? Simple tasks, the best performers did very fast. Complex tasks, they actually slowed down because it's important to get it right. And the problem is, if you don't get it right, you will get into a lot of difficulty. So, anything that you think of, you always have to think of the balance, even as an entrepreneur, the balance between taking out bad friction, putting in good friction. So let me give you an example. I wrote a case study about an amazing startup called Mind 24/7, started by a Stanford alum who's 50 years old. I wrote the case study because I wanted to show people startup. Everybody thinks startup, you have to be 20 or 25 or whatever it is. Well, here's a guy who's 50 years old. He's done a fantastic job. This is a guy who used to be a McKinsey consultant. So he's created a startup called 24/7. It's called 24/7 because they're physical mental health facilities in Arizona and they're open 24/7. Now, do you know how quickly you can see a psychiatrist in his clinic? 18 minutes. Do you know how long it takes in a hospital here?
Yeah, couple months.
So, yeah, 2 months. It's very hard to see psychiatrists and all that in hospitals. So 18 minutes. I said, how do you run your business? And he kind of looked at me and he said, we welcome everybody. And I said, what does that mean? I said, he said, we welcome anybody. You could be a teenager with attention deficit disorder or you could be a homeless person. Both extremes, we welcome. I said, do you have anything you do? He said, we run our business on one principle. I said, what is that? Never ask a mental health patient how they're going to pay for it. What do you think most people will do if you say, first question I ask them is, how are you going to pay for it? Will they get mental health care? So his first thing is, let's give them mental health care. So what is he doing? He's taking friction out for them, making it easy. However, I asked him, how do you pay? He said, because I take in everybody, the local government pays me money because the local government hospital is not swamped with, their emergency room is not swamped with mental health care patients. And he said, I looked at police and I found out that the cops in Tucson spend 1 day a week with homeless people and other people at the back of their car. What do? They're going from hospital to hospital and saying, would you take care of this person? And what do most hospitals say? They can't pay? Sorry. So the guy keeps on driving. You're wasting his time. He said, now I've saved the cops time too. So the government is much more willing to pay me. And then I looked at him and I said, is this mental health thing complicated? What's the back end like operationally? So he smiled and he said, it's kind of like a car wash, he said. I said, wait a minute. Taking care of a mental health patient is like a car wash. How? I said. He said, when you go to a car wash, if you simply want it to be clean, bronze. You want cleaning plus something else, it's silver. Various other things, it's gold. Same thing with mental health patients. So we quickly say, bronze, silver, gold, and then you appropriately channel. Now, look at how simple he's made the business. But one of the interesting things is so when he was describing this business, I said, where are your best doctors? And he smiled and said, in the front. I said, why? Because they are the ones who decide bronze, silver, or gold, and then we can take care of that part very, very easily. Otherwise, if they're at the back, you can't let them go through everything and then decide bronze, silver, or gold. Am I making sense to you about?
It's the same as the hiring process, right? With the whole process being long and tiring and complicated and welcoming, it's still recruiters, not hiring managers, who are on the front line and talk to the candidates first.
Not only long and complicated, you still don't know whether the person's going to succeed. So even there, but in any event, you have to create a different kind of friction. So let me give you an example. We rely a lot on interviews when we hire people, even though research has shown they're terrible and unpredictable and all that. There's this company, they hire traders, people who go and trade in stock markets and all that. Do you know how they hire traders? So before you get a job, you have to participate in a one-day poker tournament. Yeah, why is it? Why do you think they want you to play in the poker tournament? What are they trying to find out?
How well can the person lie?
No, not only
Okay,
that.
not
Most
only.
importantly, and you can certainly find that out too, because that's part of poker. You're very right, Yana. But what they're looking at is in poker, you make a lot of losses too. And they want to see, because you can't make gains every time. I want to see what do you do when you make a loss? Do you take even more risk? Do you double down and do crazy things? Or are you able to manage yourself better and say, you know what, I think I'm going to do something different? And so all the time, what we sort of have to do is we we got to make it easy in a startup to allow people to take initiative. You got to make it easy. But then a lot of the reason why you need to put friction in a startup too is I tell people scaling a startup is not replication, it's reinvention. So, to give you a simple example, I wrote a case study along with Bob Sutton about a former CTO at Uber. His name was Tuan. He's a brilliant guy. And when we asked him, "How long do you work at Uber?" He said something like 4 years, and he laughed and he said, "But I feel as though I work for 16 different companies." And what does he mean by that? Every quarter, Uber is a different company. And so, what does that mean? If the company is scaling so quickly and changing so quickly, it means that people who lead startups, they are leading when they don't know. See, leading when you don't know is very different from leading when you know.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's incredible to think about the ability to keep moving forward, even having the complete fog in front of you. That's what entrepreneurs do.
That's exactly right. So, we lead when we know, and here I am borrowing a lovely metaphor from my colleague Frank Flynn. The leadership model we follow is the hippopotamus model. So if you close your eyes and imagine the face of a hippopotamus, what is the biggest portion of a hippopotamus's face? Mouth. And what's the smallest portion of a hippopotamus's face? Eyes. That is what we do when we lead when we know. So if you know something, we're going to open our mouth and tell people what to do. Now, is it a good idea to open your mouth when you're leading when you don't know? Not a good idea. So my suggestion is you should really be like an elephant. So when you close your eyes and think of the picture of an elephant or the image of an elephant, what's very big about an elephant's face? ears, eyes, and trunk. And so when you lead when you don't know, you have to be an elephant. Now, you cannot tell entrepreneurs and say, Yana and Juliana, you need to be elephants. You have to create good friction that makes it easier for you to be an elephant. You see what I mean? You got to make it easier for you to be an elephant, and you also got to make it hard for you to be a hippopotamus.
Well, Huggy, just 30 minutes ago, I thought I needed to be a leopard, and now I'm learning to be an elephant.
It's in the end, that's sort of what it is. One other final point I want to make before we close, and this is all for your audience who may be interested in startups. It doesn't matter whether it's a startup or a large company. Executives think of scaling. When they think of scaling, what I find is they're very, very good at planning the wedding, but not the marriage. What do you think is more important to plan, wedding or marriage? What do both of you think?
Well, planning marriage, obviously.
See, but in real life, what do? We spend a lot of time on planning the wedding. Are we going to get married in Mexico? No. We should go to Turkey. We should go to Thailand, whatever it is. The music, the food. What about planning the marriage? At least in America, when you plan the marriage, one of the important conversations you have is should we have one bank account or two? Who pays for what? All those kinds of things. You don't pay attention to it, you'll be in trouble. In a company, too, particularly startups, they're very busy planning weddings. But customers want the marriage, and employees too want the marriage. But you can't go to a leader and say, plan the marriage. You have to take out friction to make it easier for them to plan the marriage and make sure they're not spending most of their time planning the wedding.
Yeah, Hage. I hope my startup can have a happy marriage with its customers after all this insightful advice.
Well, I hope, my hope is all of that happens. But the most important thing is you have, this is particularly true for a startup founder, you have to think of life as a journey and not as a destination. When your goal is a destination, your motivation goes down after you reach the destination. If it's a journey, suppose I ask you, say, I want to lose weight by 5 pounds. That's a destination goal. After you lose 5 pounds, are you going to continue losing weight? Maybe not. Probably not. But if I tell both of you, hey, tell me the story of the journey that you took to lose 5 pounds. You say, I used to sit on the couch all the time, watch TV. I had to stop doing that. I did this, I did that. And then you realize, oh my God, I did a lot of small things to lose 5 pounds. And then you're more likely to continue. And, there's a great Roman emperor, Octavius Caesar. He used to tell his generals when they would go to war, he had only one instruction. He would tell them, I'm not going to tell you how to fight a war. You go there and you will figure out. But he would tell them in Latin, festina lente, or make haste slowly. And that is the challenge of leaders and founders. Make haste slowly. And that is why you need to put a little bit of friction in so that you slow down. That's good friction, and educate. And then you got to make it easy for you to take out things that allow you to show initiative.
Wow, what an incredible conversation we just had with Huggy Rao. From the Ulysses analogy for managing temptation to the hippopotamus versus elephant leadership models.
As entrepreneurs and leaders, it's easy to get caught up in the relentless pursuit of speed and scale. But as Huggy wisely pointed out, sometimes we need to hit the brakes and introduce strategic friction, whether that's making hiring harder, carving out time for reflection, or slowing down complex decisions.
Huggy left us with the reflection exercise for our listeners. He has 2 important questions for us to consider.
First, to remove bad friction, ask yourselves, what should be on your Ridiculist, and what are you going to do about taking things out of that?
Second, ask yourself, what is it you would make harder for your employees to do?
Take some time to think about these questions and how they apply to your organization. Reflect on the changes you can make to improve both efficiency and culture.
We encourage you to write down your thoughts and share them with your team.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out Huggy's books, The Friction Project and Scaling Up Excellence. And as always, share this episode with a friend or a colleague who could benefit from Huggy's wisdom.
And as always, some exciting news: we're giving away a signed copy of The Friction Project to one lucky listener.
To have a chance to win, support us on Patreon. Head over to patreon.com/masterytalks to join our community, get exclusive perks, and get an access to exclusive giveaways, such as the one with Huggy's book.
Subscribe to Mastery Talks on your favorite podcast app to never miss an episode.
Keep the discussion going by sharing your thoughts and questions with us. Share your questions and comments or email us at team@masterytalks.com. We'd love to hear about your experience with organizational friction and how you overcame it.
Until next time, stay focused on identifying and eliminating friction from your work.